Hello, everyone. This is Rebecca with Digital Thinker, and thank you for joining today's session. This is the first of our Hexagon Hacks series, kicking off today and running through the end of the year. Hopefully, everyone can see my screen. Definitely speak up if you can't. I'm going to go ahead and kick things off. So, just want to make the best use of our time together over the next 15 minutes. If you happen to have any questions, feel free to unmute yourself. I'll also keep an eye on the meeting chat. So just want to make sure you get the support you need, and definitely let me know if you have any issues hearing me or seeing my screen as I go through today's session. So once again, my name is Rebecca Schofstall. I just wanted to take a quick moment to introduce you to Hexagon Hacks if this is the first time you've attended. Just a little bit about what you can expect. So each Wednesday, we'll be facilitating a 15-minute session at 11 a.m. Eastern. And during this time, the goal is to sharpen your Hexagon EAM skills. This could be tips, that are shared from one of the consultants. We may cover hidden features and shortcuts, perhaps best practices that we've learned along the way, and hopefully answer your questions. So the time is going to be fast, focused, and actionable. The great thing is that each week you'll hear from someone else. So everyone's going to be participating. I'm leading today's session. Stephanie on our team is going to be facilitating next week's session. So each week you'll be able to hear from someone different. And we are holding different themes each month. So this month, the month of September, we'll be focusing on materials and inventory. October will be focused on maintenance. November, we'll be sharing topics related to system administration, and then we'll be wrapping up the calendar year focusing on mobile and field productivity. So for today's topic, as it relates to materials and inventory insights, I chose to focus on managing obsolete parts in Hexagon EAM. I don't know about you, but there have been many times I'm working with customers and their parts catalog is a little bit out of control. So there's, too many parts that, the end users don't know how to locate the part they're looking for. There are parts that were created, but none of the supporting information was ever set up, so they haven't been used. There's parts, with that are no longer used, but there's inventory, so they're still active and so forth. So, some of the reasons why it's important to take the time and identify these obsolete parts is that will allow us to essentially clean up the parts data by preventing reorders and eventually marking those parts out of service. So this will help because otherwise, if those parts remain, searchable in your parts catalog, they can inflate your inventory counts. It can cause confusion amongst the end users. You could be, carrying part inventory that's never going to be used, whether or not it's taking up space on the shelf, it potentially mistakenly gets reordered. Outdated or incorrect parts, could essentially be installed by mistake if they're still listed in your parts catalog. And essentially, too many of these kind of unusable records, are going to reduce the efficiency of your CMMS. So let me shift a little bit and kind of talk about ways, first of all, of how we can identify these obsolete parts in Hexagon EAM. So I'll go ahead and share my screen. So I'm just logged into a demo environment here. And, there's a couple of ways to go around this. I'm just going to, share what I found has worked best in the past. And you don't have to implement it this way in terms of your identification of these obsolete parts. But hopefully, this will provide you with some ideas of how you can use maybe inboxes, data spies, maybe a grid to ultimately refine the list of parts, identify those that are outdated or obsolete, and start to clean those up and remove them from the parts catalog. So where I will start with here is I have an inbox that I created for active parts with no transactions. Okay. So essentially what this query is doing is it's just going in, it's refining the list of parts to them still being active, yet there are no transactions. Okay. So if we were to look at a specific example here, so part 10007, if I were to go to the transactions tab, the default data spy here is recent transactions. So I can quickly see there are no recent transactions. But even if I were to switch this to all transactions, okay, there are no records to display. Okay. So this may be, okay, a good way to identify those obsolete parts. But let me caution you, depending on how you're using materials in EAM, simply refining by no transaction may not be the best option because it doesn't account for the part being on order for, say, a planned changeover, or maybe it's associated with a material list. So you'll want to start thinking about, okay, what's going to work best for you. For instance, if I were to hop over here to the overview tab, okay, there's nothing listed. Okay, so this is a good, an initial indication that not only are there no transactions, but this part is not associated with, say, a requisition line or a purchase order line. But if I were to look at part 10014, okay, there are no transactions. Okay, so even if I switch over here to all transactions, okay, there are no transactions for this part. But if I look here on the overview tab, okay, I do have one of these motor run capacitors associated with a purchase order. So perhaps this part is planned. Okay, so the part is on order. So this would be an example where simply searching my list for, active parts with no transactions may not be, the best starting point depending on how you're using EAM. So you'll I always want to have all, refine, to the smallest segment as possible initially, and then broaden the parameters. So what I mean by that, if I hop back over to my start center, there are 11 parts, that are active but don't have any transactions. But if I refine it a little bit further, there are 6 parts that are active that have no transactions and, no associations to, say, a rec, a PO, a material list, and so forth. So if I were to look at this particular inbox, okay, while part 1007 is in the list, 10014, okay, is not, because we saw previously that that part is associated with a purchase order. So start thinking about kind of what you want your parameters to be in terms of filtering the parts catalog, down to start identifying those obsolete, okay, or outdated parts. So think about, so the first step may be identifying the parts that were created but have no transactions and have no associations. But what are some examples in terms of why those parts would exist to begin with, right? You start kind of asking yourselves that. It could be parts that were loaded during an initial implementation, or migrated from a supplier catalog. They may have been created based on, say, your OEM manuals when commissioning new equipment. It simply could have been a mistake. The part was created, but then it was identified as a duplicate and it wasn't merged, it wasn't marked out of service. Okay. Some other examples. So let me just go back here. I'll refresh my parts screen. You could also, look at it in terms of, no recent transactions. Okay. Perhaps no recent transactions in X number of days. Okay. And you could even refine it a little bit further where not only no recent transactions, but no stock as well. And just to give you a little bit of a glimpse, okay, you can handle this with an advanced where clause in your data spy. So this one is just looking at no recent transactions within the last 180 days and where there is no bin stock. Okay. So this could be another example, okay, where you refine it based on, not being used recently and if there were no parts in stock. If there are no parts in stock, okay, let me look here. I'll just use this part as an example. We go to the stock tab, okay, the quantity on hand is 0. If I hop over to transactions, we see that the date that it was last issued, okay, was in January, and the date that it was last received was last year. Okay. This would may be a good use case where you're evaluating, okay, is this part going to be used again? Perhaps it was a one-time purchase. Okay, this would be a great opportunity to go ahead and mark that part out of service. But what about if there are parts with no recent transactions, okay, but there is stock, okay? Maybe you have parts in your part catalog that you're not planning to ever reorder, but you want to deplete the current stock that's on hand. Okay. So the quantity on hand for this part is 2, which could still be used. Okay, but you don't want to replenish it because this part's not going to be reordered in the future. In those instances, you would want to avoid marking it out of service because if you mark it out of service, it will prevent you from issuing the part. Okay. So what I mean by that is you'll find a checkbox here where you could prevent reorders. Okay. So that would prevent the part from being added to, say, a requisition or a PO, but you could still consume the parts that are currently in stock. Okay. Marking it out of service, okay, just so you know, for parts that are marked out of service, you won't be able to issue those materials and the part will not be included in the field lookup. Okay. So something you could do in this case is create an inbox for parts where prevent reorder is selected, but the quantity on hand is 0. So you know at that point in time, you could then go in and mark the part out of service. Now, the goal here is to kind of keep things kind of fast and quick. So we're already at our 15 minutes. But hopefully, this provides you with some ideas for managing obsolete parts. So, first, we need to identify the parts and then, evaluating, does the part need to be marked out of service? Is there still stock that's going to be issued, which would be a great example for marking it as prevent reorder so you can still deplenish the stock and then go in and mark it out of service. Now, we will be back this time next week. So, Stephanie is going to be sharing some tips with us next week in terms of searching for parts. So, using the wildcard search and searching using the global search for parts. Also, I included a link to our link tree. That's a great way to connect with us. And we will be posting a recording of this to our YouTube channel. So definitely subscribe to that so you're alerted when new videos are published. Okay. So thanks for your time today, and we will see you back next week for another Hexagon Hacks. Have a great day.